Welcome to another episode of our Candid Conversation. We have Dr. Eden Girma with us today. Dr. Girma holds a Doctor of Medicine degree from Aureus University and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Texas at Arlington. A native of Texas, she is currently a Senior Medical Science Liaison at KC Global Rare Disease, where she supports the endometabolic team in the areas of lipodystrophy and homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. It's a big word there. Eden has extensive experience across various therapeutic areas, including cardiorenal, metabolics, and dermatology. Eden, happy to have you on board today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Now, before we jump in here, can we talk a little bit more about how you made the transition from being more clinical focused to now being on the pharma side of the house?
Yeah, so as we all know, the medical science liaison role is not something that is really out there, and probably more pharmacy students are aware of the role. And by chance, while practicing in clinic, I had one of the reps ask me or state that, why don't you become a medical science liaison? And I really didn't understand what that was. I did my research, just went on LinkedIn, try to find connections that were similar to my background, that were in the pharmaceutical industry in that same role, or executive medical directors, which is most executive medical directors hold an MD, and reach out to them. And I reached out, not many people will respond to you on LinkedIn. And I had a few responses, and one of them was an MD that had similar background, and was started out as an MSL and was now a medical director. And he, gave me some insight, helped me with really trying to understand the role. And it took me about 2 years to actually get into an MSL role. It's very difficult because the skills that they're looking for as an MSL are usually not those that hold an MD. Those roles are really made for PharmD and PhD students. So I think it was really difficult, even when reaching out to recruiters, that you still don't get the responses that you want. And I usually always tell people that reach out to me on LinkedIn, hey, don't ever give up. It is a long process, but you have to be positive and persistent. Nobody fails when you're persistent. So
Yeah,
persistence is key. And so after 2 years, I finally got my first MSL role.
nice. That's awesome. Yeah, that persistency is definitely key. Now, in your current role at KAC, can you share a little bit more about what you do in that role and what your responsibilities look like?
Sure. So as I cover the entire central US, our team consists of 3 MSLs. So it's split, the country is basically split into 3, East, West, and Central. With lipodystrophy and HoFH, those are rare diseases, and lipodystrophy being an ultra rare disease. So now, coming from a background as an MSL in cardiorenal or cardiometabolics, you're going to see more patients because most patients, there's a large prevalence, a high prevalence of patients that have CKD, hypertension, diabetes. But when you have patients that have lipodystrophy, this ultra rare disease, one, you have a hard time finding the patient, right? These are patients that are underdiagnosed, both HoFH and lipodystrophy. So the main goal is to really go out there and educate and help physicians understand who these patients are and what they look like. So we do have key, institutions that we usually work with. But again, we also have clinical studies that are ongoing. So my role will be, the MSL role, which is engaging with KOLs, whether it's doing grand rounds with residents, educational presentations. We don't have a speaker program, so that's a little bit different from other companies that I've been with. But then also going and having site visits for our clinical studies, as well as working on certain projects, you know, educational material, especially for this rare disease, is very important. So creating those educational materials are very important, and working with our medical director and working with our team in identifying what the needs are and trying to fill those gaps. So outside of that, I also am a compliance ambassador. So I work with the compliance team representing our medical affairs team across the board. And that we have Chiesi has two businesses. One is Chiesi USA, which has air and care, and then our global rare disease is the rare side. So we're a really large company, but there are opportunities where we can all work together and collaborate. So that is the exciting part about it.
Awesome. No, that's good to hear. Now, you mentioned that Casey does not have a speaker program. For our audience, can you elaborate on what that speaker program is?
Yeah, so a speaker program is used to really educate healthcare practitioners on disease state, and some companies will do specifically disease state, and some will do a commercial branded speaker program where it also includes the drug. For us, we really try to focus on the disease state because it's a very rare disease, an ultra rare disease. So our key is to help physicians and healthcare practitioners identify these patients, because we have, like, for example, lipodystrophy. We have the only treatment for lipodystrophy. So what we want to do is focus on disease state education, and usually it will be something like a dinner program where you have a physician come in that's contracted by the company, will come in and give a presentation to healthcare practitioners. And as medical affairs team, compliantly, we are basically flies on the wall, and we're there to really for the compliance part of it.
Got it. Thank you.
So I know you touched on this a little bit with the last question that Patrick just asked, but what do you see as the most pressing challenges facing your industry or organization today?
So I think for all industries in pharma, it's going to always be access and affordability for patients, right? Regardless if we have the greatest treatment in the world, patients still cannot afford treatment, right? Because of insurance companies and payers. And so that's part of our job too, is, to really try and help or have payers understand that the importance of treatment for these patients, and then the complications if they don't have the treatment. For rare diseases, I think it's a little bit different from what I've done in the past, where we know that there's no treatment for these patients. These patients probably will not live to a certain age of adulthood that most patients would live if it was a non-rare disease, right? And then also with rare disease, there is, like I mentioned in the past and recently, or prior to this, I said that we have a hard time identifying these patients, right? Sometimes it could be that the patient doesn't know that they have the disease. Two, it could be also that the healthcare practitioner doesn't know how to identify the disease, because these are ultra rare and it's not something that we really touch on in medical school or in residency. So there's limited patient data and registries compared to those cardiometabolic disease states that have larger registries, in whether it's Epic or whatnot, and using different companies and AI generated registries right now. But overall, I think the rare disease pharmaceutical industry is kind of at a crossroad when balancing innovation, costs, and patient access, which are all very crucial in addressing the challenges. And so it requires creative solutions and continued collaboration across the board.
That is a perfect transition to our next question. So, and again, you're not speaking on behalf of KAC here.
Correct.
If you have an unlimited budget, and based on those challenges you just voiced over, how would you go about solving those challenges? What are some solutions that you would offer?
Yeah, I think number one, it's important to be innovative, right? Be creative. Sometimes I think identifying what is really important, and to me, I think patient education is really important. Now, if you educate the physician, that translates into the patient also being educated, right? So something just so simple as leave behinds that you can have, just one-sheeters that have, a checklist of how to identify these patients. So I think it's really important in being innovative with disease state education. Sometimes programs can be really, like the speaker programs and whatnot, can be really, doing ad boards can be really expensive. But you have to be able to leave something and help these practitioners understand what's going on. The other thing is, I think raising awareness, patient advocacy is really important, and this is where they play a huge part in, especially in rare disease. So, the increased awareness of rare diseases among the general public, healthcare practitioners, policymakers, can really also drive more funding and support into helping patients. These advocacy groups play an important role in educating stakeholders, and raising the profile, the picture that we would normally see and that they wouldn't really understand in these rare diseases. And then, and just really understanding, just having a greater acceptance for real world evidence is very important too, as well. Just really to help us overcome the healthcare challenges that we are facing right now. As I mentioned, the healthcare climate, political climate that we face in this country is very challenging. So especially when we're looking at these small patient population, trying to collaborate with hospital groups or healthcare practitioners and leveraging data from electronic health records. That's something that's really simple because it's just there.
Mhm. Absolutely. You mentioned one thing I wanted to touch on. You mentioned that the innovation and creation and the patient education leave behind is something that is an important solution. Is there a way that you guys can quantify the impact of those leave behinds?
Um, I think it's really hard to quantify the exact, like, the number of patients that you're actually going to impact. But I think what's most important is that leave behind stays with the healthcare practitioner, right? And so if we can help them understand the foundation and get them interested in, this rare disease is really interesting because it's like, wow. When healthcare practitioners actually understand what it is, they're like, oh my goodness, I've seen this patient. And I said it too when I joined KAZ and really studied and really understood what lipodystrophy is, for example, even HoFH. And you kind of think, wow, there are patients that we've seen and we just didn't know anything about it. So I think I don't think it's really about quantifying, but I think it's really about just overall the understanding. And like I said, these patients are very rare. There's it's 1 in 300,000 patients,
Wow.
like, for example, that have lipodystrophy. So, you know, it's very important that we do have this educational material for them.
Got it. One more question here and from the solution section. Do you guys have field access specialists at Casey? Is that a role that you guys have that's separate from the MSLs?
What's the field access specialist? I mean, I guess, so the thing is, I think every what I've learned is in being in pharma for 4 years is that every company has a different title for almost the same role. And you come there and you're like, okay, so this is really what it is.
So I guess, and we can always scrap this part if we need to. In terms of, I know I did some engagements with AbbVie where their MSLs, there was a difference between the MSLs and then the individuals who would go and speak to the different provider groups and provide, it felt more, I don't want to say it's not clinical, it's more so the business side or more operational or procedural support. At Casey, is the MSL doing all of that? Are you guys taking the reins for all types of engagements with the provider groups, or is there a different group that goes out and sees providers also?
So we have a thought leader liaison,
Okay.
which is under marketing, but also collaborates cross-functionally with medical, that will be able to, I think, speak in I think that role is also different in every single company.
Yeah.
And so for us, they collaborate with us, as medical affairs, and then they are also the ones that lead the speaker bureau, the commercial speaker bureau. And, I think if they are able to, if they work with also the payer MSLs. Now, I also do work for a private company. It is not a public company. So with more of these larger, although it is a mid-sized pharma company, I think some of the larger companies, for example, at Bayer, there were so many different roles that collaborated with medical to go out and, like, the payer, and access, groups that go out and also work with the MSLs to identify the gaps in, the market. Did I answer your question?
No, that's helpful.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And then kind of going back to our question. So I know you mentioned that one of the barriers, especially for patients who have lipodystrophy, is even finding the patients who have it. So I guess in terms of your vision for the future, do you see any innovations with improving like diagnoses of lipodystrophy, or are there other areas in your field where you do see growth for this patient population?
Yeah, so lipodystrophy is very difficult. With lipodystrophy, there's two of the common types of lipodystrophy. So there's congenital generalized lipodystrophy, and then there's a familial partial lipodystrophy. The partial lipodystrophy are a little bit more common, and those are the ones that most providers will likely see. Now, the congenital generalized lipodystrophy patients, there's 4 types under those. Just CGL1 and 2 are the most common, but those are usually diagnosed in pediatric ages, right? So they're really young. We only provide treatment for generalized lipodystrophy, but we do hear that there is a partial lipodystrophy. There's a prevalence of partial lipodystrophy that are being seen across the board in multiple specialties. So we're helping different specialists understand whether, because these patients have metabolic disorders, they have diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, they have liver disease. So really trying to help, the disease state is very extensive, right? So just helping, again, that's where we come in and helping physicians understand, one, who these patients are, what they look like, having an image for HCPs to look at is very important. And we've seen that, that it really does make a difference. So I do really see that we'll be in the future that hopefully one with the proper education, and that also goes not only going that one-on-one KOL engagement, but it's also going out to conferences, right? And really identifying some of these conferences where you can meet with them, with KOLs, and having roundtables or disease state presentations, and really helping physicians, again, identify who these patients are.
Thank you for sharing that. And
I hope I answered your question.
yeah, you did. And then kind of thinking, in school right now, I feel like one of the hot topics is pharmacogenetic testing to kind of tailor treatment or even diagnose patients earlier on. Do you know if there's that technology, I guess, right now for diagnosing patients who have lipodystrophy?
Yeah, so there is a genetic test. Of course, these are genetic disorders, right? So, one, again, identifying the patient, but then two, having the access to a genetic counselor, right? And how many institutions have genetic counselors, or how many institutions really have these genetic tests that these patients can go to? So we have centers of excellence that have these, and we have about 5 of them in the country that offer these genetic testing. So usually they'll go out to the closest provider and do the test. And sometimes there might be institutions that already have genetic panels, and include the lipodystrophy panel on there. But again, it's how do we identify the patient? But there is the opportunity for that. And going into that, that's where the growth in rare disease is so significant in the pharmaceutical industry in the next, 5 to 10 years. I think we're going to see a lot with these new technologies and AI, right? In improving patient diagnosis and identifying patients.
Thank you for your insight. That's really helpful knowing, especially like I said, I feel genetic testing is such a hot topic in all of our education right now. So it's really cool to see it, I guess, from someone who's in the field and, working to help these patient populations.
Yeah, absolutely.